launching the recording of the thing. I forgot to do it.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. So that's my fault. Okay.
And then the other side of the paradox is that if we slow industrial activity, we reduce the particulates going into the atmosphere, and they fall out in a period of a few days or a few weeks, and that heats the planet even faster than the heating due to greenhouse gases.
Okay, so the combination of an economic crack and this risk of reduced global dimming could be like it's one of the main dangers. This combination could be one of the main dangers on the short term.
I think it's the primary danger we face today. So, for example, the paper by Levy and colleagues in 2013 pointed out that as little as 35% reduction in industrial activity would cause a 1 degree Celsius global average temperature rise very quickly. There's no way for humans to keep up with that. And the latest paper by Rosenfeld and colleagues, which came out in Science on February 8th of this year, indicates a much more rapid transition, a much more rapid increase due to an even lower reduction in industrial activity. The paper was not clear. The paper didn't quantify how much of a change was needed, but in an interview released at approximately the same time the paper came out, Rosenfeld, the lead author, said that we have underestimated the aerosol masking effect by half. So he says half of that 35% will be enough to trigger a 1 degree Celsius global average temperature rise. So that's not much. As you know, a 20% decline in the industrial economy could easily happen as a result of a recession at this point.
Okay, wow, that's even worse than I thought. Okay, and now still about global dimming. I've listened to your videos, conferences, etc. I've also researched a little bit. I'm not a scientist myself. I just the average Joe actually. But I wanted to ask you, why are you so? Are you, and if you are, why are you so skeptical about the potential of artificial global dimming? You know, injecting aerosols, and is it because it will not work to cool down the Earth, or because of the negative effects, or is it because there are too many unknowns?
This has actually been studied. There was a paper that came out of the United States National Academy of Sciences in 2015, and then by a European body that same year of similar stature. Both of these papers are linked to from the Climate Change Summary and Update. And the primary idea for cooling the planet was solar radiation management. It was exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
And both of these bodies that were put together to synthesize the current evidence, both of them concluded that it would not work and it might make the situation worse. So solar radiation management in 2015 was deemed a bad idea. Now, of course, that's all we ever hear is that we need to do it because it's desperate times. Well, it was desperate times in 2015 too. It's just that very few people recognize that we were in desperate times.
Okay.
So this idea has been studied extensively by these two synthetic bodies, one in the United States representing the National Academy of Sciences, the other in Europe, and they both came to the same conclusion that solar radiation management and geoengineering more generally would not only improve the situation, it could actually make it worse. So it's not just me reaching this conclusion. It's a whole bunch of scientists put together in a room for meetings over several days reaching this conclusion.
It seems to me, and I wanted to ask you that later on, but I will ask you now, how come there is this body of science which seemingly is a bit hidden, and how come you are at the forefront and only maybe you're not the only one, but I've been searching and it seems to me that you are the only one making this public.
Yes.
And bringing the synthesis, because some scientists talk about some stuff, but they don't connect the dots. Are you the only one doing bringing the whole picture, or?
No, I'm close, but I'm not the only one.
Okay.
There's one other scientist I know about who is taking a relatively integrative approach. That's Andrew Glickson at the Australian National University. And my co-host and I, Kevin Hester, and I interviewed him for our last radio show.
Okay, I haven't watched or listened to that show yet.
Yeah, so I would recommend listening to that.
I will.
And in fact, I would go to kevinhester.live. And the reason for that is Kevin includes links to several of the papers that came up during the conversation.
Okay.
So if you go to kevinhester.live and listen to the conversation, it's linked at his blog post. So we had the conversation the first Tuesday of this month. So that was maybe the 5th or so, approximately. I don't remember the exact date. So go to kevinhester.live and go back to the first week of the month, and there will be a link there to, and there will be a bunch of links from there to the conversation we had. So Andrew Glickson comes closer than anybody else. Kevin Hester, who is a sailor and an electrician and just a reasonably rational individual, reaches the same conclusion. He's not a scientist, and he admits it. So it seems there are two scientists. And I think there are a couple of reasons why more people are not coming to this conclusion, at least openly. Also, one more. Peter Wadhams, who was at the time the director of the ocean physics program at Cambridge, came out and in an email message told me that I was being too conservative, that I should not be adding the self-reinforcing feedback loops. I should be multiplying them. The effects are truly multiplicative, not additive. So he told me I was being too conservative. And he started to sound a lot like me in his public presentations. And then he was forced into retirement by Cambridge University. And that is why nobody else reaches this conclusion. Loss of privilege. There's when it comes to global dimming or the aerosol masking effect, I didn't know about it until shortly after the paper by Hansen and colleagues was published in December 2011. That was the first I'd heard about global dimming. Only recently, like 2 months ago, did I discover that there are at least 3 earlier papers that deal with global dimming. The first of them is from 1929.
Wow.
1929. I guarantee you that the rich people on this planet have known about global dimming since 1929. The 1929 paper mirrored almost exactly the paper by Hansen and colleagues. Hansen and colleagues did not cite that paper or any of the 3 previous papers that have been published, 2 of them in Science. So that's a big deal. The paper by Hansen and colleagues did not cite any of these 3 papers, and their conclusion, as if they came up with it from scratch, was almost identical to the 1929 paper.
Okay.
So those are physicists, astronomers, doing the math with respect to the particulates, and they reached the same conclusion as was reached in 1929. I'm trying to find that paper, but I quoted it. In fact, I wrote pretty extensively about this topic in my latest peer-reviewed journal article, which appeared in the Clinical Psychology Forum. And I can send you that when we're done here.
Okay. So it's there's a recurring theme, what you've just mentioned, the fact that scientists pretend to be discovering something and pretend to be giving some analysis as if they are just discovering it. And it's always fresh. It's not like they admit that there's that there's been some time to think about it, and it's like we're rediscovering the stuff again and again. And
Absolutely.
Which is it's a good excuse not to go deep, because maybe I don't know how long the world will go on, but maybe it will be rediscovered again in 10 years if the world still goes on. Okay, so that's pretty disturbing. disturbing
Yes.
news. What you're telling me about pretty much silencing scientists. I mean, putting them into retirement. Is that the
And
reason?
and it's not just the institutions, it's the individuals censoring themselves.
Because they are protecting
Yes,
themselves.
exactly.
They are, yeah, they are, okay.
And why am I not doing that? Because I haven't drawn a paycheck for 10.5 years. I have I have nothing to lose at this point. I have lost everything except my
Yeah,
integrity.
yeah. You
My
must be
integ-
annoying for them. The fact that you renounced your privileges puts you in a position where you are like a free election. You
right.
can do anything you want, and so that's the reason. I mean, besides your character or maybe the story of your life, but that's partly the reason why you are free to say what you want, and you're the almost the only one.
Absolutely. There are no adverse consequences. I
Mm.
was my professional work, my professional life was essentially destroyed by a deep state operation a couple of years ago when I was living in Belize. And as a result of that, I lost all credibility in the scientific community and beyond, and lost most of my friendships as well. And that was not an accident. That was not something that happened completely out of the blue. That was exactly correlated with the timing of my warnings about the urgency of the crisis we're in. And so I'm convinced that that operation was intended to remove me from public service, and it's been largely successful.
So, but what you're telling me, because in your summary, you're saying that it's not a conspiracy, but what you're telling me is it's slightly different in this private conversation. And
Well, the no no the climate change and abrupt climate change, there's no conspiracy in terms of reporting that. There's a conspiracy in terms of shutting down the reporting of it.
okay, but so comes the question, because probably you will answer that we are under, well, those in power are sociopaths, or I don't know, but it's not in the interest of the elite to keep going, destroying the world. So to what point are they just not caring about the destruction of the world? Uh,
Well, money has always been more important than planetary destruction. Money has always been more important than future generations to almost everybody since money came into being more than 5,000 years ago. Everybody I know would gladly trade in a few acres of trees, a few acres of biological diversity for a few $1,000s. It's almost everybody on the planet because money is the currency that gives us privilege. And people really want privilege.
More than life, and more than the future, and for
Everybody thinks that the future is far away. So we were warned about what's coming in 1847 by George Perkins Marsh, U.S. ambassador and diplomat. We were warned in 1896 in the peer-reviewed literature by Svante Arrhenius. We were warned on the floor of Congress in 1985 by Carl Sagan and Al Gore. We ignored all of these warnings for a few dollars today, knowing that the cost would be great in the future. So, not you and me, we didn't know a thing.
mm,
We were completely ignorant of the situation, and so are most of the people around the globe. But the people who pull the strings of empire, the sociopaths who are actually running the show, they know things. They know things that you and I don't. They know about the paper from 1929 that describes global dimming. Of course they know. It's their job to know. So there are these intelligence organizations within every government, and they're charged with finding this information, synthesizing it, and pointing out what the costs are. But you think anybody would get elected who promoted slowing economic growth? Of course not. We elect people because they promise that they will increase economic growth and therefore everybody will have lots of money.
mm.
So, and again, everybody thinks it's far into the future. You know, when Al Gore and Carl Sagan were speaking on the floor of Congress. That was 1985. And they were describing the situation we're in today in 1985. But that was 35 years ago.
And will there come a time when even the rich and the elite will want to react? Maybe, probably it will be too late, because it's probably too late already. But will there come a time when they see on their own lives the catastrophe hitting them?
I'm certain people are already seeing that. We're seeing a lot of people buy property and develop that property in places like Hawaii and New Zealand and Australia. Most notably, Steve Wozniak, who doesn't know anything about the science. Do you know Steve Wozniak?
Yeah, I know the anecdote. I know he contacted you, and
okay,
I've heard that from you actually. Yeah, so
okay. So he moved to Tasmania, the southern United States of Australia, specifically because of my message, because he has enough money to do that. And other people are doing the same thing. Peter Thiel, who created PayPal, has secured residency in New Zealand. He's only visited there for 12 days. But you throw enough money at the New Zealand government, just like any government, they're going to give you citizenship. So there's a few people who are already taking these steps. Mark Zuckerberg basically bought an island in Hawaii. So he has a big organic farm already operating in Hawaii. So, there are people who know and who have the means to do something about it personally. There's a great conversation. I don't think I've posted this online. There's a great conversation. This futurist is what he calls himself. He's a futurist. He predicts the future. And people pay him a lot of money for that. He was called to a conference, and he thought there would be a big conference, and he'd be presenting his usual information about what's going on in the world and what is likely to occur in the future. And he gets there, and it's a small conference room, and there's only 5 other people. There's him and 5 incredibly wealthy individuals. And their questions are, given what's going on in the future, given the collapse of industrial civilization will occur in the near term, how should we make sure we're safe? Should we put shock collars on the people who are working for us? Should we kidnap their children and hold them hostage so they will work for us? These are the questions the sociopaths have. And it seems perfectly normal to them because they've been abusing people for their entire lives. These are the kinds of questions that futurists get these days.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand that those people have a level of preparation. Let's call it like that. But do they envision your scenario, the scenario of extinction, of total biological annihilation? Because
some of them do.
Okay.
Yes, there's no doubt some of them do. Some of them, because they're incredibly egotistical, they think they can solve anything. A lot of these people are engineers, and they've spent their entire lives fixing problems. So some of them think that I'm wrong. Others think that I'm correct. And the ones who think I'm correct are taking one of 2 approaches. They're trying to extend their lives a little bit longer than most of the people, and that's where the bunkers come in. That's where New Zealand and Tasmania, Australia come in, and Hawaii. That gives people days, weeks, months. We don't know for sure how much longer that gives them. But look at how much money the wealthy are willing to spend in the hospital to stay alive for another hour or 2. They'll spend millions of dollars per hour to stay alive. The other approach, in addition to the bunkers, is that they are living large right now and hiding important information from people. So the example I give in my latest peer-reviewed article is there is yet to be, besides me, there's essentially no confirmation of the aerosol masking effect and its importance. In fact, James Hansen was recently interviewed, said that my projection of extinction of humans within 10 years was crazy, and his proposal is to reduce emissions. What? He knows about the aerosol masking effect, and he's telling people to reduce emissions, which will only accelerate our extinction. So, and that allows him to hold on to his privilege a little bit longer. So I think there's two approaches. The people who are preparing the organic farms and the bunkers, thinking that will give them a little bit longer. And if you have basically an infinite amount of money, then it only makes sense to trade some of that money for a few hours or a few days or a few weeks longer. You don't even know how long. Nobody does. The other approach is to spend money and live large today and lie to the masses about the aerosol masking effect, lie to the masses about grief therapy, lie to the masses about a lot of things so that we keep this whole system running as long as possible so that those people can enjoy their privileged lives. I'm not sure I would do anything different, to be honest, and I'm not sure you would either.
I understand. So they don't want the panic to spread because it's not so much in an altruistic way to protect people from the chaos of panic. It's to protect the system for them to keep having slaves, basically, or people working for them normally. So
absolutely.
Okay, I understand. I had a misconception when you were talking about sociopaths before. I thought you were comparing preppers systematically to sociopaths, but I see now it's more subtle presentation. I think I understand better now.
Yeah, I don't think all preppers are sociopaths, and I don't think all sociopaths are preppers. Okay. Some of the sociopaths aren't prepping as we tend to think of to extend their lives. Consider, for example, Steve Wozniak. He moved to Tasmania. He hates to fly. He won't fly commercial airlines, but he picks up from Silicon Valley, moves to Tasmania. And I'm pretty sure that was to extend his privilege for a few days or weeks, months longer. Because when he did that a long time ago, we didn't know anything about the aerosol masking effect. Except for the people who knew about the 1929 paper and the 1992 papers. But that wasn't very many people. And it certainly wasn't him because he was following my work and I didn't know anything about it. So by the time he moved, he didn't know about the aerosol masking effect. Okay. I almost feel bad for him.
Okay. It must feel strange to know that many people in power are probably following your work, your message, to see the extent of the reactions to your stuff, etc.
And they have been for a long time. There's an individual whose cover name is Mark Austin. And he was an NSA contracted spy on the campus of the University of Arizona in 2005, following me in 2005 and getting me put into such a miserable position that I would leave active service at the university. That's 14 years ago. They probably knew about me before then. And, you know, I wasn't convinced about the veracity of this individual until I met him in person in January of this year in Florida. I happened to be going there with my partner to deal with some business of hers. And Mark Austin was at an intelligence meeting right next to Mar-a-Lago, which is very near where I was going to go. And so he spent all day hanging out with my partner and I and just talking about what goes on. And about every half an hour or an hour, he would do this. He'd go, "Oh, excuse me." And he'd walk off about 50 feet and he'd make a call or he'd send a text message and then he'd come back. So he was supposed to be at this intelligence meeting, but he skipped out for the day, just like I used to skip out of conference meetings all the time when I was a professor because they're boring as hell. He's been doing this for a long time, so they're boring as hell for him too. And then he'd get an important call or an important text message. He'd have to deal with it right away, and then he'd come back. So now I have little doubt that he is who he says he is. And he also knew things about me that nobody would know unless they were a spy, unless they were really on the inside.
Because you mean he admitted being spying on you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because I think so. He can actually admit it because is it because he believes what your message and he knows the situation that everything's going down, and then
Yes.
okay, wow,
Yes.
that's
And okay, so there's two things going on here. He pointed out that there's at least two groups in the United States government in the what we'll call the surveillance security organization. The two groups are one that loves me because I'm doing the work of 1,000 analysts for free.
okay.
And so those people are protecting me. I get TSA pre-check every time I fly. I've never applied for it. I never have to take my computer out of the bag. I never have to take my shoes off at the airport. I never have to do any of those things. That's because there are certain people who are watching out for me, who think I'm doing good work. And he is one of them.
Okay.
There's another group of people who wants me murdered. And that's the group that was responsible for removing me from public service. That's the group that was in charge of sending all these messages attributed to me. Had me saying terrible things about my colleagues and friends and ex-wife with direct messages to all those people. I didn't send those messages. The people who hate me in the federal government sent those messages and made it appear that it was me.
So it was the first step to make you disappear, even
Yeah.
physically in afterwards, or?
Well, I just don't have the reach I used to have. Formerly, 3,000 people a day would read my blog. Now it's 1,000.
Oh, I thought it was increasing all the time, but okay.
No, there was a sudden drop about 2 years ago in the wake of this operation. And I'm not invited to give presentations anymore.
Okay.
So,
But I've seen a couple of presentations in May at the bookstore and with this guy on the boat, it seems.
yeah.
So
Yeah, May
yeah,
was
I haven't. Okay. Okay.
May was a long time ago.
Okay. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
used to
Oh, yeah.
I used to travel every month. I used to be on a speaking tour every month. And now it's been May. Was that June, July? It was 3 months. 3.5 months since I've been on tour, and I have nothing planned. Nobody has asked me at any time in the future
But
to give
to be fair, you've done a good job of spreading your message, and you have explained in extenso almost everything. I mean, the material is available on your website. There are many videos, and you're covering the material. So you've done your job, basically.
Well, yes, I have, but look at how many people watch one of my videos. It's a few tens of thousands. I think the most watched one is 100,000, but the second most watched one is about 60,000, and then it goes down to about 20,000.
Yeah, the one I was watching was about 8.5. Yeah.
That's pretty common. So less than 10,000 is very common. Okay, so some famous rock star puts out a video, 5 million people watch it in a week.
Mm.
I got 8,000 people. They got 5 million.
Yeah, well, I meant you've done a good job spreading the message initially, but of course, what's missing is you appearing on television for a debate on public television. That would be amazing with smart people, not dumb people who just don't know anything about that. But with that would be amazing.
I have offered. In fact, I was invited to go to the American Union of Geography meetings, I think it was. I don't remember for sure. This was about 2 years ago. And Michael Mann was invited. We were going to serve on the same panel. Michael Mann works at Pennsylvania State University, the university in the United States that gets the most money from the military-industrial complex, Penn State University. Michael Mann had me removed from that panel. I was no longer invited. I didn't make that trip. Probably half a dozen people over the course of the last 5 years have asked me if I would debate James Hansen. And I say, yes, anytime, any place. I will get there if I have to walk. They contact James Hansen. He's not interested.
Okay.
So I'm willing, but my message has been quashed, has been tampened down a little bit, and there's nothing, I don't have any control over that. And so I think you're right. I think I have done my job, and it just isn't enough in the wake of this resistance that I've met from the surveillance security state. So there are two groups in the federal government, and it appears the one group is winning in terms of minimizing the exposure that I'm getting. And, again, there's just nothing I can do about that.
Okay, that's very sad to hear, but I was suspecting something like that because your message is very provocative, and normally you should appear on the media, even if they kind of frame you as the extreme guy. It would be good for their audience, but yeah, so
right, but I don't appear on any corporate media because the people who own the corporate media are the same people who own the large corporations and who largely influence government policy. Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Peter Thiel and Mark Zuckerberg and, list 5 more. Those are the people who are exerting considerable influence relative to the number of people they are or that they represent.
We've gone, that's very interesting. That's surprising, a little bit surprising. And
and if I say this kind of thing in public presentations, people say I'm paranoid.
Yeah, I understand.
That I'm some sort of conspiracy theorist for even thinking this sort of thing. But I see what's happening in my world. I see the people who went before me killing themselves or being killed. I actually know what's going on in the world. That's a problem.
Yeah, I've heard of statistics about the number of environmental activists who die on the ground defending forests or whatever.
Right.
Every year, it's I don't remember the number, but I think it's more than 20 or 40 a year.
Yeah. It's more than are killed by terrorists every year. It's in the hundreds.
Hundreds? Okay.
Yeah.
It's I feel so sad for those people who are passionate about defending something. It's so noble, and the fact that it's really sad. So just to come back to some more precise stuff, we talked about the global dimming, but apart from an ice-free Arctic or crop failure, which would be probably very clear signals that human extinction is imminent. Is there any other signal that we could consider as a clear signal that extinction is imminent? I mean, in months.
Yes, if it were reported by the corporate media, there are some things that would serve as clear signals. For example, the burning of the tropical rainforest in Brazil. Oh, wait, that's already happening. It's been going on for 3 weeks. There's the demise of the coral reefs all over the world because of coral bleaching. Oh, wait, that's happening all over the world. It's just, both of these are terribly underreported. The burning of the forests in Brazil had been going on for 2.5 weeks before anybody in the corporate media pointed it out. Why is that? It's among the biggest news in the history of our species on the planet, yet it doesn't make the news.
It is a bit on the news in France.
It is now, within the last few days. Those fires,
it took some time, yeah.
Those fires started 3 weeks ago.
Okay, so maybe they couldn't avoid it. It was too big to avoid it after. Okay.
Right. The satellite images now clearly show an enormous amount of area being burned. So people are looking at that. You can't avoid reporting it forever.
Yeah, it's thousands of small fires started everywhere. So
right, and it blackened out the sky in what's the other big city in Brazil? Not Rio de Janeiro. Anyway,
yeah.
Anyway, the day before yesterday, it was dark all day, in this big city. It's 1,000 miles away from the fires, from the closest fire. So kind of a big deal. It's getting hard to hide from people when they can't see the sun.
Yeah, and with the internet and the social media today, people
Right.
report it even if they are not like the official media. So it's the info spreads. Okay, so there are actually many signals which show
Yeah,
already.
this is the third worldwide coral bleaching event in human history. It's also the third one since 1998. That's 3 in the last 20 years and 3 in forever. So that's a clear sign. Also, another sign, we're at the warmest temperature, global average temperature ever experienced by Homo sapiens in our history. In our more than 300,000 year history, we've never lived on a warmer planet than we are right now. So there's the disappearing Arctic ice, there's the atmospheric methane, there's the atmospheric carbon dioxide, there's the forests on fire, there's the coral reefs bleaching, there's the acidification of the ocean. You know, if people want to know at this point, there's a bunch of individual pieces that point to our existential crisis. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to ignore them, but so far we're doing fine at that.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's true. I will tell you maybe a little bit about my personal strategy to know what you think about that and what yours may be, but I thought it would be smart to be ready for any scenario because there is still a part of uncertainty about when will the collapse. I mean, the collapse has already begun, but when will the hard collapse, crop failure happen, leading to extinction? So I was obviously I want to enjoy life while it lasts. I mean, in a carpe diem kind of way. I'm also prepping so that the last few months or years are more harmonious and serene for me and my loved ones, and also not to be caught into the chaos of finding food and finding a place, etc. And I also have a more medium long-term plan just in case collapse and extinction takes longer than I expect or than you or expect. Like if it doesn't happen by 2030, which would be kind of surprising, and so I was wondering, what is your strategy? I know you don't necessarily recommend prepping, but what is your strategy? I know you're back in a big city, so
yeah, I don't recommend not prepping. I don't recommend prepping. What I recommend these days is for people to do what makes them feel useful and invigorated, alive. Do today what you've always wanted to do. Don't put off until tomorrow, next week, next month, the things that you really want to do with your life. You know, I was prepping. I probably had the premier platinum grade homestead in the history of the planet.
Oh yeah, I know, yeah.
The mud hut in New Mexico. And one of the reasons I walked away from that was because I became aware of the full impact of the aerosol masking effect. And of course, since then, there's been the paper by Rosenfeld and colleagues indicating it's even worse. And of course, it's worse than we will ever know. Right, because there are people who know things that we don't know. For example, the aerosol masking effect. I have no doubt that there are people who knew about that paper when it came out in 1929. It wasn't you and me because it's not reported in the media to you and me. So I recommend people do what they love, first and foremost. I recommend that people prepare themselves, but my kind of preparation might be different than what preppers typically think. So I was interviewed by this guy called the Canadian Prepper. I don't know if you saw that video.
No, I don't remember that now.
It was probably about a year ago. Okay. And his YouTube channel has a lot of views. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to him was because he has a lot of views. So Canadian prepper, check it out, find an interview with me. And
Okay.
recently he's been saying to the people who are listening to him, he's been saying things like, looks like Guy McPherson was right when I talked to him 8 months ago, 10 months ago, 12, whatever it was. He says things are happening now that are just exactly what he was talking about. And so he gets it. And yet he's prepping and he's encouraging other people to prep too. And I have no problem with that at all, if that's what people like to do. I didn't like doing it. I'm a teacher. I'm not a sharecropper. I'm not a gardener. I'm not a farmer. Those are not things that I enjoy. I was doing them. I came to be quite an expert cheesemaker, for example, and I learned how to do small animal husbandry, taking care of goats and chickens and so on. But it's not something I enjoyed doing. I live to teach. And that's one of the reasons I'm living here in a not very big city in Westchester County, New York, about an hour north of New York City. One of the reasons I'm here is very easy for me to get to places. And also we have this incredible infrastructure here, so we can have this conversation and there's not even a blip. If I were in Belize, I'd have to drive an hour to a lodge and spend $200 for lunch so that I could have a good conversation with you, uninterrupted. So,
okay. But your way of prepping is, because I've watched many of your videos, your way of prepping is more on the spiritual and psychological side.
yes, it's between the
for
ears.
for yourself and for other people sharing this, I mean, the grief management or this
Right.
part is maybe more important than prepping with material stuff, because
Well, if you're so committed to prepping like I used to be in New Mexico, then you haven't done the necessary intellectual work to prepare for when that fails. And that's what I think is important, and that's what I'm focusing on now, is the intellectual and emotional work that I have done and continue to do, so that when the whole system falls apart and the aerosol masking effect is alleviated and things are getting rapidly worse and all the trees around me are dying and the water stops coming through the taps, so that it's no surprise to me. I can think of nothing worse than 7.7 billion people in the world being surprised by profound environmental change. I think that's the worst thing that could possibly happen. And that's why I'm focusing my work on informing people about what's coming. And then at least there won't be the big surprise. That's where the chaos comes from, is from the surprise. If everybody, and obviously I'm not going to be able to inform everybody, and neither are you, but if we can inform 7.7 billion people on the planet, in general, what is likely to happen, not with the specifics, but in general, at some point, this civilization will go away, because they all do. At some point, it gets to be too hot and too wet and too dry at various places in the world, so we can't grow grains at large scale. And so if people know that, then what happens, instead of grabbing a knife and heading for their neighbor, they might actually calm down and say, this is it. This is what we've been warned about. Now is the time when we need to appreciate even more the lives we've had, spend our time with our loved ones, and not go freaking out with a knife or a gun.
I understand. And you're talking about surprise, which would be could bring chaos, yes, unpreparation and surprise. But there is another feeling, and to me, that's the main reason why I want to talk about that to people. It's to avoid the regret. I mean, if people say 2 or 3 years from now understand that collapse and extinction are coming, they will look back on the couple of years that have preceded, and they will have immense regret for some of them who had postponed some projects who had been preparing for their retirement all their lives, working like madmen, and it ima- you have probably imagined this feeling, but I can imagine that they would be crushed. I mean, spending your whole life preparing for something in the future and then having the future taken away from you by something you cannot control, and there's almost, I think, no solution to prevent that. So those
Absolutely.
people, they would be crushed to learn that,
Absolutely.
and they would be somehow resentful because they would understand that other people knew
Yes.
and didn't warn them. And
Yes. Exactly. I'm certain that when the water stops coming through the taps and the petroleum stations have no more petroleum and so on, when the lights go out, I'm absolutely convinced almost everybody is going to want to blame somebody. They'll be surprised and they'll say, why didn't somebody tell me? And so I'm trying to tell people. I've been trying to tell people for years. And
maybe they will blame you for not being more efficient.
sure, I've no doubt about that. No doubt in my mind. People will say Guy McPherson gave up too soon, whatever.
He didn't try enough.
Right, exactly.
I don't think it would be the case, but yeah.
Of course. Because that's one of the things we as humans do best, is we look for somebody to blame.
That's easier. Just like we look for somebody else to do an effort to change their ways, well, our ways will wait. So
yes, the standard response to my message is somebody's got to fix this. And I say, what about you? No, somebody in power has got to fix this.
Yeah, which brings me to, because I've watched a video with this guy on the boat, the No Escape video. I think that's the one. Well, you talk about Extinction Rebellion, and I've been interested by Extinction Rebellion, and now I've just learned your position about them, which was a bit surprising to me, but not so surprising because I've been to a meeting by Extinction Rebellion, and I could see from the inside what they are about. And in France, it's just starting, so and it's slightly different because we have a different culture as compared to the British.
With that in mind, I haven't had completely negative experiences with Extinction Rebellion. Rory Verato, who was one of the founders of New York City Extinction Rebellion, invited me to come speak to the city council, to the environment committee of the city council in New York City. I spoke to them, and the next day they declared a climate emergency. So had it not been for Extinction Rebellion reaching out to me and getting me involved, and a whole bunch of other people too, they had dozens, maybe even hundreds of people testifying at this meeting. But then they had declared a planetary emergency. I consider this an enormous success.
Okay.
So I think that Extinction Rebellion is doing some really good things. They're bringing attention to the existential crisis we face.
That's true.
But they're ignoring the aerosol masking effect. They're pretending that there's something we can do to fix this. And in that way, I think that they're only going halfway with the truth. And I think that's unfortunate.
Well, so I've posted I've written a long article about global dimming, presenting the basics of it, global dimming and the McPherson Paradox, and I've published that on the forum on the French branch of Extinction Rebellion. I've just got one. It hasn't been noticed yet. I don't think I will see if. I will see the reactions to it, because it pretty much contradicts the idea that we can simply reduce CO2, which I thought it would be perfect to reduce CO2 before I knew that, thanks to you. So I will see the reactions, and hopefully we can have a debate about that in the French XR,
right,
and see how it goes. But
well, be sure to look at my latest paper. I think it's called a concise summary, and follow the links back to the aerosol masking effect.
Okay.
It's in my Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored essay. Have you seen
Okay.
that?
I will look deeper into that. I just wanted to give them a first basic intro to it,
Right.
and like the link to Wikipedia, your video where you shortly introduced this documentary by the BBC, from
Yes.
2005, I think,
Yep, that's right.
uh, because they didn't know at all about it, so I had to go slowly. But I will go deeper
Right.
if I can bring the debate about that
Right.
and see the reactions because
It,
yeah.
since Hanson's article, the two articles I've known about since then have pointed out that Hanson and colleagues were too conservative. And that's the expected route in the scientific community. Things can only be worse than we know about.
Hmm.
And we've heard that over and over again. A paper comes out, Hanson and colleagues says, if all of industrial civilization goes away, it adds 1.2 plus or minus zero point 0.2 degrees Celsius. Okay, the next significant paper on the topic comes out as Levy and colleagues, and they find as little as 35% reduction in industrial activity causes a 1 degree temperature rise. And then the Rosenfeld and al. Paper that came out in February of this year, well, in the paper, they didn't put a numeric value on it. In the interview that was conducted coincident with the release of the paper, Rosenfeld said they're overestimating by double or underestimating by half, however you want to view that.
Okay. Wow. And so from what you're saying and what I've read, the aerosols are staying in the atmosphere for a couple of days to a couple of weeks maximum. So it would be extremely rapid if there was this change.
Yes, they're falling out every day.
Hmm.
And it's only because we're constantly putting them into the atmosphere that we're maintaining equilibrium. If we stop, James Hansen, in an interview that came out a year after that paper on the aerosol masking effect. So that interview was conducted in December 2012. It was actually released, I think, on January 5th, 2012. And in that paper, he says 5 days. He says, we stop industrial activity within 5 days, all those aerosols fall out. Now, the general consensus among other climate scientists is that it'll take 6 weeks.
Mm.
Because we don't have any way of measuring, that's the problem. So we can't track an individual aerosol particle, much less thousands of them, to get the sample size we need to know when they fall out. It'll be quick, though, because regardless whether it's 5 days or 6 weeks, that's way faster than plants can keep up. And a 1 degree Celsius global average temperature rise is enough to kill every tree on the planet by the next growing season.
And you're talking about monitoring this stuff, but I watched a video which was presenting, I think, 4 climate experts, climate scientists in Australia, and their personal lives and the impact on. Maybe you've seen this video, and I was wondering how long climate experts will keep doing their jobs and exploring, going to weird places. Crunching numbers
Right.
and if they are so close to the issue, can we trust that they will keep doing the job? Do they
Right.
have this?
That's a good question because, first responders, are you familiar with that term?
Yeah,
So,
fireman, is that?
yeah, firemen and policemen,
Oh, in police, okay.
the people who respond first to a crisis.
Okay.
The EMTs, what is that? Emergency medical technicians, the ambulance people, the police force, and so on. Even they, in the wake of a disaster that lasts longer than a few days, even they go home after just a few days. Because if the disaster is spreading, they want to be with their families. They want to protect their families before they protect some schmuck like you and me.
Mm.
Right? Yeah, they're paid to provide services for you and me, but they feel most deeply committed to the people they live with. Who can blame them? If a police
So,
officer comes to protect me and then he finds out that his family is being threatened, I wouldn't expect him to stay with me. I would expect him to go home to his family.
What would be nice would be hundreds or thousands of climate experts quitting their jobs, and
Yes.
on the last day, because they would be free, then they could spread the truth about what they know. But they would have to sacrifice for the truth.
Yes.
Hmm.
They would have to make sacrifices. Most people aren't willing to do that.
I understand. Yeah, it's a bit idealistic. You said recently that we need to take right action and not be attached to the outcome,
Mm-hmm.
and to build on the question about Extinction Rebellion. Do you think that should activists push politically to make the world a better place, or
Yes.
should they focus on the excellence in their personal lives?
Both.
Should they should do both? Okay.
Both. Balance is important in your personal life, in your professional life. People like Macron and what's the German woman's name? Merkel.
Mikaël, yeah.
People like Macron and Merkel and even Trump, if he gives a shit. I don't know. It's hard to tell with him. People who actually are committed to public service, they also have to maintain a balance between that public service and their own families. And nobody blames them for that. If you work all the time and ignore your family relationships, the people who are most important to you, then you're going to lose those relationships.
Okay.
And nobody
Okay.
would recommend doing that.
Hmm.
So yes, I think governments should be brought to heel, as it were, brought to tell the full truth. But I don't see very many XR people doing that, by the way, because all of the speakers for XR ignore the aerosol masking effect completely or downplay its importance.
Because thinking about that, because admitting that global dimming exists means that that obviously there is no way out. So
Exactly.
it's admitting that what they're doing, the outcome will be extinction no matter what. So they are admitting that they are not essential, because if there is no global dimming and they come and they in theory help curb down the CO2, they are heroes. But if there's global dimming, their mission is not in vain, because they are still fighting the good fight, but the outcome is different, and
Yes.
that's probably the crux of the matter, the reason why
Yes.
they.
You know, if your identity, if who you are is attached that closely to the work you're doing, whether it's activist work or office work or cashier at a grocery store or whatever, if your identity is tied up in that work, then there's this danger that losing that work or recognizing the unimportance of that work will destroy your ego, will destroy your identity. So my identity for most of my adult life was professor. And I walked away from that and became professor emeritus, but I wasn't in the classroom teaching anymore. And it destroyed me intellectually, emotionally. It had a profound negative impact for a long time, because teaching is not just what I do. A teacher is who I am. And
Mhm.
being unable to do that anymore was devastating for me. So you can imagine the people in Extinction Rebellion who are fully committed to bringing the governments to heel, to making them report the truth, to reducing emissions, and then they find out that everything they've been encouraging points us in the wrong direction. Suddenly you're not an Extinction Rebellion superstar, you're an idiot.
Yeah. Hmm.
And that's hard to deal with. For
Hmm.
example, if I found out that everything I was doing in the classroom for those 21 years was wrong, I'd been lied to about everything, and I was relaying these lies to the students, and then I found out one day all that is wrong, that actually black is white and night is day, and I was wrong about everything. That would be devastating for me. My entire identity is wrapped up in this work I've been doing and very committed to for the last 21 years. And now you're telling me that I lied the whole time. I can only imagine that's what's going to be like for a lot of people in Extinction Rebellion and other activists when they find out about the aerosol masking effect.
But I have to tell you something which I'm just realizing right now. I knew about global dimming before kind of I kind of joined XR France. I knew about global dimming before, but to be honest, I hadn't really completely registered the thing. I mean, there's the logical understanding of it. And maybe some emotional understanding, and then there's like really taking it into account. And I'm realizing that because I've been reading your stuff yesterday, and I was translating and looking for checking sources, etc., for to write about it on XR. I had to really confront with this idea and to accept it. And it's not an easy idea. I mean, from a logical point of view, understanding it, and then emotionally understanding that it makes the environment impossible. It's almost beyond many people's I don't know how to say it, but mental capacity to register that no, it's not possible.
Right. So imagine you spend $2 million and your entire identity is wrapped up in walking away from industrial civilization. That was me. And then global dimming tells me that I was mistaken. That was me. Now I have to admit that I made this terrible mistake and spent all of this money that cost me all of these relationships. You think I want to front up to that? You think I want to admit that? Yeah, I was an idiot. Nobody wants to say those words.
But you were a scientist, so you were used to arguments and comparing stuff and
right.
judging and accepting.
Yes, to new evidence changing my mind.
So was it difficult for you?
Very. Extremely.
So we can expect that it's difficult for...
Of course.
Everyone.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, the XR people who are willing to admit to the full effect of global dimming, you know, we're talking about a 20% reduction in industrial activity causes a 1 degree Celsius global average temperature rise. And so they're still calling for reduced emissions, which means a faster extinction than we would otherwise have. They don't want to admit that. Who wants to admit that? Nobody wants to admit, oh, geez, I was trying to prevent extinction and instead I caused it to go even faster. Bummer.
You know, you mentioned several times, you mentioned that civilization is a heat engine and that there is a momentum in the way we do stuff, we behave, etc. And in XR, there is also a momentum, a counter momentum to go against that. And that momentum was reduce CO2. It's like a mantra. It's the basic idea. Going against that, I'm realizing that going against that is almost like a sacrilegious, you know.
Right.
Because I will have to write about that in the XR forum, but I think it won't be easy to bring those ideas. I mean,
right.
the global dimming, I think they just think that it's like a small detail, a small scientific detail on the margin, and I will have to bring it on the forefront of the issue. And
right, and it's the same with anti-civilization activists on many other topics as well. You know, Derek Jensen and Lear Keith and thousands of people in Deep Green Resistance and Idle No More, they all point out very good reasons for wanting to slow or stop industrial civilization because it's killing everything. That's reason enough right there. But then if they're successful, and they will never admit this because their identities are wrapped up in it, if they're successful, they're going to drive everything to extinction even faster. That's not what they say they want. But if you take the rational approach, that's where the steps lead.
So if we try to predict what's coming up, those the activists will first fight the idea of global dimming. Maybe they will accept it in a second time, and then they will be looking for solutions. Like I was just yesterday, actually, I was really searching for this injection of aerosols,
Right.
or like an umbrella in the space, or I've watched or mini robots that could filter the sun
I've heard them
rays.
all. I've heard them all. Trust me.
So that would be the following. When they accept the concept, the reality of global dimming, they will be looking for a solution. So probably the solution will be in all the media when and if the global dimming is accepted as a concept, as a reality.
Right.
Do you think it will happen that global dimming is accepted before it's very late?
No.
But I will be pushing for it in France.
And so have I been pushing for it.
Yeah, I know.
Basically since I found out about it. And that's been a while now. 2012, 2013, I was really pushing. But, as I indicated, the sociopaths who pull the strings of empire, they've known since 1929.
Wow.
That's a long time. That's 90 years they've been hiding this information from us.
I've watched one of your videos where you were presenting the history of knowledge of global warming or climate change, and now I learn about global dimming. It's amazing how long we have known. Well, the scientists or the elite
Right.
or the happy few have known. It's really amazing.
Yes, it is. And it's just another indication that just because we know doesn't mean we're going to act. Because the costs can be quite high. Personally, the individual costs of action can be quite high, Mm-hmm. If you take your activism seriously, you might get thrown in jail.
That's the plan for XR activists. That's their goal, to be thrown in jail to attract media attention. And it's working, actually. In UK, it's been working. But I've read some criticism of XR that it's strange how fast the movement is spreading.
Yeah.
There was like a conspiracy theory around that I don't know. It's
right. Yeah, it could very well be because the media just glommed onto them and their message of reducing emissions. So it could be that it was to the benefit of the media, or at least the owners of the media. You have to remember that there's only half a dozen media organizations owned by a very few people. That half a dozen media outlets controls 90% of the message. Mm-hmm. So if they see XR out there telling people to stop using fossil fuels, what does that mean? Well, we've known since 1865, Jevons Paradox, written by William Stanley Jevons in his book, The Coal Question, 1865, that there's basically no such thing as conservation. Mm-hmm. Every drop of oil you don't use gets used by the wealthy. And every sociopath knows that and uses it to their advantage. So the media are telling people to conserve to reduce their emissions. All that means is some rich asshole is taking another trip to Hawaii.
Wow, I hadn't really thought about this that way, but it makes sense. Yeah, makes sense.
That's one of the topics I write about briefly in my latest peer-reviewed article. So I will send you the whole issue, the whole, thing. But my part, I will point out the page numbers. So it's in something that looks like this, and it's got 50 pages or whatever, and I'll point you to the page numbers that my article appears on. It's only 3 or 4 pages. And it goes through all these things that it took me a lifetime to realize that everybody should know from the time they're in first grade. But nobody does. There's a reason for that.
There's a plan.
And you know, when I say that, I realize it makes me sound like a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
By the way, conspiracy theorist was a term created and promulgated by the CIA of the United States in 1967
Mm-hmm.
to disparage people who were connecting the dots.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. It goes deep, the rabbit hole.
Oh man.
Uh, yeah. So I had a few more questions. I mean, we've covered pretty much everything about it. I don't know if we can keep talking a little bit more, or
Yes.
because it's okay. So we've talked about reducing industrial activity and the effects that it would have, like reducing global dimming. And I'm vegan myself, and I've been pushing for veganism inside of XR, and it wasn't well received, I must say. Uh, we were a group of 25, and there was only one other vegan guy, and he didn't want to do anything with me. I wanted to, well, there were some vegetarians, but I don't know how many, but I was surprised that there were so few vegans. And it seems to me that if the world went vegan like that, there would be a reduction in CO2 emissions. But there is no, well, there would be a slight drop in aerosol from that because the tractors and the transport industry. But I don't know the percentage of it. But now that I think about it, even reducing veganism could be possibly could reduce global dimming also.
Right.
Any way in any way we change the system as it is right now could bring a few percent of the global dimming.
Right.
So
And because, you know, the refereed journal literature tends to be very conservative, and
mm,
it takes years for things to get published and admitted to. And of course things are worse. They can only be worse than what we know. So it could be that it's not a 20% decrease in industrial activity. It might be a 10% decrease in industrial activity that causes a 1 degree Celsius global average temperature change.
okay, so
We
any
don't know.
change, even something that's minor, could I mean, in addition to a couple minor changes, could if we get like 5 changes in our lifestyle, which with each 2% global dimming, that would be like 10% decrease in global dimming. So even minor changes could trigger the opposite
Right.
effect. Wow.
It was about a year and a half from Hansen et al. 1.2 plus or minus zero point 0.2 degrees. It was a year and a half later that Levy and all came out and said as little as 35% reduction. And then it was 5 years later that Rosenfeld and colleagues came out and said as little as half that. So this all occurred over a span of 6 years.
So maybe in couple of years, like in 2 years from now, they could actually tell us that it's 10%.
Right.
Mm. Wow, it's well, this global dimming thing is. Do you so you discovered that through an article, right?
Yeah, through the Hansen paper.
Okay.
Actually, I discovered it how I discover almost all my work. I discovered it through a newspaper or a magazine article about the effect. And then I followed it back to the paper. And because I still have library privileges at the University of Arizona, and because these days all university libraries carry everything in electronic form, I could go to the original paper. I didn't have to rely on the abstract. Most people have to rely on the abstract for all these peer-reviewed papers because they don't have access to the whole paper. I
Yeah.
have access to the whole paper. So I can
Okay.
read the whole paper and figure out what it says, which you can't tell from the abstract.
And did you get the meaning of it? I mean, the scope,
Well,
the significance of it, or at once, or
no, no, I never do. I never, essentially in my entire life, I've never had an aha moment where I said, "Oh, that's this. This is everything." Blah blah blah. No, that has almost never happened. So it took a while. I had to read the article. I had to go away and work in the garden and turn shovel and move the wheelbarrow, and I'm sort of thinking about it back in the back of my mind. But it was minor. It was all industrial activity ceases, and that causes a 1.2 plus or minus 0.2 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise. But that's not going to happen. Civilization is going to be turned off like a switch one night, and I knew that. Then the other paper comes out year and a half later by Levy and colleagues. And I go, ooh, that's bad, as little as 35%. And I knew then that things could only be worse than we know, because I know about how conservative the peer-reviewed process is. I know that in order to make the corporate media, it has to be way worse than is being reported and so on. So in mid to late 2013, I realized that it was all far worse than I had imagined before. But again, maybe I'm a slow learner. It trickled in over time, and I was still doing all those things on the homestead. I was still milking the goats and raising the garden and canning the food and making the cheese and doing all those daily activities. But somewhere in the back of my mind, the wheels were turning. And at some point I realized this is big. Even at 35%, this is big.
In your personal story, it was kind of a surprise, this global dimming. I mean, it appeared. Is there, I've got a question about that. Is there any way, I'm looking for my question. You see, I haven't given all hope yet, because I still have this question. Is there any way we could have a big surprise? I mean, what was my question about that? I found it. Is it possible that there's a big surprise in the near future? Like a natural variation in solar radiations, or new space technology to reduce radiations, we talk about that, or a new discovery about the way the planet naturally regulates the climate. Is there something new we could discover? I don't know, a chemical reaction, something that could...
Yes, there is. And by definition, it would be a surprise. So I'm open to those surprises. I've been communicating with an engineer who works at the Roland Institute, part of Harvard University, for the last few months. And I don't want to reveal very much of this information because it's his intellectual property, not mine. But he thinks he has an idea for cooling the planet, and he approached several of his colleagues with it. He approached a couple of well-known climate scientists. They didn't even respond. They didn't even write back to him. He approached them at least twice, and they didn't even write back. So reason 7,427 were going extinct. We can't even have a conversation, really? They wouldn't even answer him. You know, he thinks, and he may well be right, that there's an engineering solution to deal with global dimming. And he can't get two well-known climate scientists to answer his email message. It's the most important subject, perhaps, in the history of our species.
Shouldn't he contact some engineers instead?
He has.
Okay, because maybe they have more...
Yeah, he's an engineer, and he works in an engineering laboratory. So he's surrounded by engineers, and the two climate scientists that he contacted are engineers.
Okay.
You know, as quite a few climate scientists are, you know, they tend to be astronomers, planetary scientists, physicists, and then a few engineers as well.
Okay. Okay, so that's maybe for Christmas that would be like a nice nice surprise.
You know, it'll be great, and obviously I want that to happen because I'm white and therefore very privileged. And so I would like to keep this whole show going.
Yeah. But, you know, it's a bit worrying, the way you describe this, the slow motion of science and academia, and the way things are accepted, and all those. It seems like everyone is slowing down the truth, and it's it's so strange. I thought scientists would be very curious. I mean, you strike me as a kind of a curious guy. I mean, you have this curiosity for the world and to discover stuff, to explore. And scientists aren't scientists very curious about the world?
Yeah,
They
in
should
general.
jump on the opportunity to if only for their own lives and
Yeah,
the lives of their children. It's
yeah. Albert Einstein has a famous quote about scientists and children being similar in that they have curiosity more than most people. And I think that's true, although most scientific activity, especially academic scientific activity, university and college-based scientific activity, has been monetized to a great extent, just like everything else. The money has become more important than the passion for new knowledge. And so, it shouldn't be a big surprise. That's been happening at the level of the entire world. 5,000 years ago, when the notion of currency spread all over the world, money wasn't the most important thing. It was more than 2,000 years after that Socrates was going around and Plato was writing about the importance of the gymnasium and the importance of the academy, and it wasn't about money. It was
but
about
yeah, sorry to interrupt, but you alluded in one of your videos. You alluded to the fact that there was a guy, I think his name was Sam something, Sam Conroy or something like that, who was publishing but not under his real name. So the scientists could create an avatar to publish and still retain their privileges if they are smart about it. So
that's a
they,
good
they have
point.
they have no excuse. I mean, they could do it if they really wanted, or maybe they are paranoid about that. They don't want to be caught. But
Yeah, that's
mm,
a good point. Although few people, again, it comes down to that issue of balance.
mm.
Do you want to take even more time away from your family to write under an assumed name in addition to your regular name? So, Peter Wadhams, he's busy. He's like 70 years old and he has kids and grandkids and he has a life and he's been forced into retirement and he still continues to conduct academic activity. And now you want him to double down and become the next Sam Carana and have an alternative identity? That's tough, man.
Do you know the real identity of Sam Carana? Or
I'm 99% sure I know who it
okay,
is.
just
Yeah.
suspecting. Okay, well
And
that's cool.
I used to think it was 2 or 3 people, but more
Ah,
recently I've been provided information indicating that it's one person.
okay.
A social scientist, so
Oh, okay.
not a natural scientist, but a social scientist who is reaching beyond the social sciences and getting into the natural science. So it's clearly somebody who is rational, who has a rational mind and knows how to connect information together.
Yeah, but maybe that's the mark of a certain kind of scientists. I know that you have published in the clinical psychology
Clinical,
journal
yeah,
of,
right,
and to have interest in different domains areas. I mean, it's very complementary, and I mean, as you know, we have to deal with it emotionally, etc. With the information. So psychology is a big part of it. The way we communicate with people. I mean, you have the right information. I've learned from you a lot, but if I don't know how to communicate with people, I could alienate those people, and
right,
I wouldn't get any results. So there's an interdisciplinary aspect to it. Yeah.
right,
So it's a good thing that social science people get involved, and maybe they will
right.
be even more successful than you are. To maybe they have keys
How,
or clues that I
how
mean.
could they not be? I haven't moved the needle at all. I really
Well,
haven't.
you have, but yeah, and
Maybe
maybe
at the
there.
level of a few individuals, but society hasn't moved even a little bit. And that's okay. My whole life as a teacher, I was focused on individual change.
Mm.
So that's my job as a teacher, is to get one person to question what they're doing with their life and maybe even to change it.
Do you have any idea about the profile of the people who kind of accept the the proposition you're making of this, of global dimming, of the way the situation we are? Is there like a profile for the people who accept it, or?
In general, and so a lot of what I'm about to say is generalities. It might not apply to a specific person or demographic, but in general, people who look like me are the least able and willing to accept my message. Mostly, it's people of color, women, people in poverty.
Really? That's surprising. I wouldn't expect that. Yeah.
If you think about it, if you're an African American, for example, your entire history is one of oppression. For at least the last, say, 1,000 years, or even 500 years, all your family has known is oppression. So, that you're being lied to by your oppressors is not going to be a surprise. That things are only worse than you know already is no surprise at all. So, on the other hand, people who look a lot like me and a lot like you, privileged Caucasian men, especially heterosexual men, we lose the most. In the face of an existential crisis, or even the demise of industrial civilization, we lose the most because we're at the top, man. Being a privileged heterosexual Caucasian male is about as good as it gets in the entire history of the world. We get jobs. We get high-paying jobs. We get jobs where we can sit at our desk and think all day. I did that for 21 years. I got paid to think. Who gets paid to think? Almost nobody. There's a lot of people out there working horrible jobs where they're doing the same mechanical steps every single day. And they can't wait for some profound change in the system. But given my life, I have enjoyed enormous privilege just because of the demographic I fit into. And so people who look a lot like me, they have too. They got the good jobs. They got a driver's license just for showing up. They get to drive a 2,000-pound metal object that might hit somebody at any time. And if it does, there'll probably be some minor penalty imposed upon them if they look like me. On the other hand, if you're black in the United States, you can get shot just for being black. And so if you're in that demographic, then of course you expect the worst.
I see.
So when I come across artists, musicians, women, people of color, those are the demographics that don't struggle so much with my message, with the scientific part of the message, even though for the most part, they're not scientists. The ones who are slowest to get it, Caucasian male engineers, absolute worst. Engineers think we can fix everything, and through their entire lives, they have fixed things so they worked out well for them. Are you an engineer?
I'm not.
Whew.
I'm not. No.
I'd hate to think I was insulting you all this time.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Okay. So maybe an option could be to challenge engineers to see to put them in front of their incapacity to change what's going on, to help them accept it afterwards.
Right. Yeah. So, Peter Wadhams is an engineer, Paul Beckwith is an engineer, and they are among the people who are having the greatest difficulty, even though they're studying climate change, they're having great difficulty coming to grips with this message. Because it's
admitting that they are going to die.
Yes. And that engineering didn't fix it, and that they, in their positions, were unable to fix it. And that's tough. That's like me concluding that my teaching was not having a significant impact except one student at a time. If I had been expecting my teaching to impact 1,000 people every year, I'd have been very disappointed. If I expected the outcome of my teaching would be that my students would not have children, I would have been very disappointed.
And speaking, yeah, yeah. Speaking of children, there was this guy who was, I think, yeah, you mentioned his name is David Keith. David Keith.
Oh yeah.
He explained in a TEDx presentation, no, in a TED presentation, the official presentation, that I think that's him. One day his teenage daughter told him that they were talking about climate change. There was a round table and they had everyone's perspective on it, and his teenage daughter told him, "Your generation did it. Now fix it." So pressure also can come from people around you. When you're an engineer, people put pressure on you. Especially if you are in the right age group,
Of course.
they consider you as responsible. And even though maybe this girl was also responsible, she emits CO2. She buys clothing. She travels. She has a computer. She consumes stuff. So
listen, we're all responsible. We're having this conversation. How do you think we're having this conversation? You got plastic wrapped all around your head. Where does that come from?
I built it myself from wood. No, not really.
And we got these computers, and we're taking advantage of this incredible infrastructure.
Yeah.
It was built so that we can have this conversation. Of course, we're all guilty. Yeah. And so that's why a primary part of my message is no guilt, no shame, no blame. What good does that do? We were all born into this. We were all born into this set of living arrangements. You knew nothing when you bought that headset. You knew nothing about the consequences of millions of people buying those headsets and how it scales up. And even if you'd have known, it wouldn't have made any difference. Just because you decide not to use the headset doesn't mean the other million people are going to set them down or throw them away or get rid of them. So, and especially given the McPherson Paradox, right? That damned if you do and damned if you don't. We either keep overheating the planet, or we slow down industrial activity and then we heat it up even faster. What are you going to do?
Yeah, you shouldn't have invented global dimming, man.
That was my worst idea.
Guy McPherson, creator of the global dimming. Okay, well, it's been a very interesting discussion with you. Thank you very much. I think we've covered most of the things. I was interested to know how it feels for you to be at the forefront of this consciousness. How you've been able to accept it and be happy and find peace. And my last question was maybe have you ever regretted discovering that?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was more than 10 years ago I left active service at the best job in the history of the world. Most people have no idea what it means to be a professor. I get to do the work I want to do. That was my life. I get to choose what I teach in my classes. I get to choose the research I conduct. I get to choose the people I work with, graduate students, postdocs, undergraduate students working in the lab. I get paid to sit at my desk and think. Holy cow. The privilege there is unbelievable. And I get paid a decent wage for it. I get paid a six-figure income in dollars in the United States. That's not insignificant. I can do pretty much anything I wanted to do with that money. I could, had I wanted to, I could have gone out to eat every single night of my life. So, of course, I regret knowing what I know and walking away, and I especially regret not knowing about the full impact of global dimming when I walked away, because it's that ignorance and that drove me to take those steps. And now, of course, by remaining ignorant, by listening to people from XR, for example, other people are doing the same thing. Think about that for a minute. Other people are now doing what I was doing. Well, who benefits from that? It wasn't me. It was the same 30 sociopaths who always benefit from greasing the economic system. I spent
Wow.
a couple $1 million. Even if you only get a few thousand people to spend $1 million, that's still real money. And it all goes to the top of the ladder, doesn't it? So, of course, there's this big push now to get people to build their homesteads, to do the prepper thing. So that's a lot of money flowing through the system. And most of that money ends up in the hands of a relatively few people. So I'm convinced that that's part of the reason that we aren't hearing about global dimming, is that it gives people hope. And by giving people hope, it encourages them to spend a bunch of money that might add a week or a month to their lives, but they were not informed. I don't mind if somebody spends $1 million to add a day or a week to their life. That's fine. You got that money, go for it. But I don't want them to do it by being misinformed. Now I'm informed by living here in New York, an hour out of New York City. I recognize that when the grid fails, when the water stops coming through the taps, when whatever, that my life is going to be short after that. But that's a choice I made. I know that I could add days, weeks, maybe even a few months if I move to an off-grid lifestyle again. But I'm choosing to not do that. As long as people get to make their own choices with full information, I'm a huge fan. You want to be a prepper? You want to build the bunker? You want to do all that stuff? Go for it. But just know that there's this thing called the aerosol masking effect that is going to destroy habitat for humans and other organisms when what you're preparing for comes to pass.
But maybe Steve Wozniak will invite you to stay at his ranch. You never know.
He hasn't been very nice to me.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned he forgot to thank you. So I won't be as impolite as him. I would like to thank you for giving me the time today and for being intellectually honest, as every scientist should be, and for all the information. I think it's you're helping people. You're helping me to cope with this stuff emotionally, to be ready. And it's probably the next challenge to get ready for what's coming. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the conversation. When we're done here, I will send you an email message that will have the full issue, the full September issue of Clinical Psychology Forum, and I'll try to include the page numbers.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.